The hostess looked right through me like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see your name here." I stood at the entrance of the Magnolia Room at the Hartwell Hotel and looked past her shoulder at the tables draped in white linen, the centerpieces with white roses and gold ribbon, the string quartet in the corner playing something I didn't recognize. My son's wedding reception. A party I'd written a check for, $42,000. I remember the exact figure because I'd had to liquidate part of a CD to cover it without touching my retirement. "Try Bernard Okafor," I said. "That's me." She ran her finger down the tablet screen a second time. "Slower now, the way people do when they're hoping the answer changes." It didn't. "I'm so sorry, you're not on the list." I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a union electrician in Columbus, Ohio. I have calluses on my hands that no amount of lotion has ever fully softened. I've rewired buildings in July heat and January cold. I've worked double shifts to put my son through a university I never attended myself. And I was standing in the lobby of a hotel I'd paid for, being told I wasn't welcome inside. Let me back up. My name is Bernard, and I'd been a widower for 9 years. My wife, Louise, passed from ovarian cancer when our son was 24. She was 51 years old and the most capable person I have ever known. She could stretch a grocery budget, settle an argument, and grow tomatoes in a patch of yard that got maybe 3 hours of sun a day. When she died, something in our family shifted and never fully shifted back. My son Garrett took it hard. We both did. But grief does different things to different people. For me, it made me hold tighter to what was left. For Garrett, I think it made him want to leave everything behind and become someone new. I can't blame him entirely for that. I understand it in the way you understand something painful that you'd rather not look at too long. Garrett was always bright. Louise saw it first, the way mothers do. He got a partial scholarship to Ohio State, and I covered the rest. I drove him to campus move-in day with his boxes in the bed of my pickup. He was embarrassed by the truck. I noticed. I didn't say anything. He graduated with a business degree, got into pharmaceutical sales, and within 5 years he was in management. He moved to Atlanta. He started wearing suits that cost more than my first car payment. None of that bothered me. I was proud of him. I told anyone who would listen about my son, the regional director. What changed things was Simone. He met her at a charity gala his company sponsored. She was 32, worked in corporate law, had gone to Vanderbilt. She was polished in a way that I think made Garrett feel like he'd finally arrived somewhere. Her family was from Buckhead. Her father played golf with people who made decisions about things I'll never understand. The first time Garrett brought her home to Columbus, she looked around my kitchen with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't rude. She was careful. That's almost worse. Garrett proposed after 14 months. He called to tell me on a Tuesday evening, and I congratulated him and meant it. A few weeks later, they came to visit, and we sat at my kitchen table and talked about the wedding. Simone wanted a venue in Atlanta. Something elegant, she said. She mentioned the Hartwell Hotel. I looked it up after they left. The ballroom rental alone was close to $18,000. I knew what was coming, and I didn't fight it. I told Garrett I wanted to contribute. That was the word I used. Contribute. He said they'd been thinking the venue and catering might run around $40,000, and that any help would mean a lot. I said I could handle it. I watched something cross his face when I said that. Surprise, maybe, or relief. I told him I'd transfer the money to their joint account once he sent me the vendor contracts. He sent them within the week. I want to be honest about something. I didn't give that money expecting a reward. I gave it because Garrett was my son and it was his wedding and Louise wasn't there to see it. I gave it because she would have given everything she had. I gave it carrying her with me. The months leading up to the wedding were strange. Garrett called less. When I called him, the conversations were shorter. Simone was always nearby in the background. I could tell by the way his answers got clipped. I asked once if I could speak to the florist about a centerpiece arrangement Louise had always loved. White gardenias, just to include something of her in the day. Simone sent me an email 2 days later explaining that the floral aesthetic had already been finalized and changes would affect the overall vision. I read that email 4 times. I drove to Atlanta in September 2 weeks before the wedding to drop off the blazer I'd bought for the occasion. Louise and I had found a tailor on High Street years before who did good work at fair prices, and I'd had him fit me for something dark navy, simple. I wanted to look right for my son's day. When I got to their condo, Simone opened the door, looked me over, and said the blazer was lovely. The way she said it told me she didn't think so. I stayed for dinner. Garrett talked about work and a new investment account he'd opened. He didn't ask about Columbus. He didn't ask about any of the men I'd worked with for 30 years or whether I'd heard from his Aunt Beverly. He talked about his neighborhood and a restaurant he and Simone liked. I ate the food and listened and drove home that night thinking about Louise, who would have known what to say to bridge the distance I was feeling and didn't know how to name. The wedding was on a Saturday in late October. I arrived at the Hartwell at 4:30, 45 minutes before the ceremony. I'd pressed my pants that morning. I'd shined my shoes. I had Louise's photo folded in my breast pocket the way I do for anything important. And the hostess told me I wasn't on the list. I asked her to check again. She did, same result. I asked if there was a manager or a coordinator I could speak with. She called someone, and a young woman in a black blazer came out and consulted her tablet and confirmed with genuine apology that my name wasn't in the system. There may have been an error, she said. I asked her to call the groom. She hesitated in that way that told me she'd already been briefed on something. She said she wasn't able to interrupt the wedding party during photos. I stood in that lobby for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the front desk. An older couple walked past me toward the ballroom and nodded pleasantly. A server carrying a tray of champagne flutes didn't look my way. I was a man in a navy blazer standing alone in a hotel lobby where his son was about to get married. I thought about walking in anyway. I'm not a small man. Nobody was going to physically stop me. But I thought about Louise. I thought about what she would have done. She would not have made a scene. She would have done something quiet and lasting. She would have found a way to let the truth carry its own weight without her having to throw it. I left. I drove to a diner 2 miles away and ordered coffee and a piece of coconut cream pie and sat in a corner booth while my son got married without me. The waitress, a woman maybe 10 years younger than me with kind eyes and sensible shoes, refilled my cup without being asked. I don't know why that kindness hit me the way it did, but I sat there for a while. When I got back to my motel room that night, I'd booked 2 nights in case anyone wanted to have breakfast. I called Garrett. He didn't answer. I texted him. "Congratulations. I hope you had a beautiful day. I love you." He didn't reply until the following afternoon. A brief message. "Thanks, Dad. It was perfect." That was it. No explanation, no explanation, no acknowledgement, no sorry you couldn't make it. I drove home to Columbus on Sunday morning. I stopped at the cemetery on the way out of Atlanta and sat in the car in the parking lot. I didn't go in. I just needed to be near something honest. In the weeks that followed, I did a lot of thinking. I'm not someone who acts fast when I'm hurt. Louise always said I went quiet before I went clear. She was right about that. I went very quiet. I thought about the money. $42,000 I'd saved over years of overtime and careful living. I'd not asked for it back. I'd not asked for anything except to be present at my son's wedding. The check had cleared months before the event. There was no legal instrument that protected what I'd given. I understood that. But there was something else. Over the previous 4 years, Garrett had borrowed money from me 3 separate times. $30,000 for a down payment on the condo when he and Simone were first together. $12,000 for a car when his lease ended. $8,000 when his company restructured and his bonus was delayed. Each time I'd lent it, I'd kept it informal. Family doesn't need paperwork, I'd said. I trusted him. Those loans totaled $50,000. He had repaid a little under $9,000. I had never pushed. I had never mentioned it when we talked. But now I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and added it all up, $92,000, between the wedding contribution and the outstanding loans, plus 9 years of trips to Atlanta, flights I'd paid for myself, a check I'd sent when they painted the condo. 2 sets of appliances I'd bought as housewarming gifts. I thought about what Louise would say. She was practical in ways I sometimes wasn't. She would have said, "Bernard, what exactly are you waiting for?" I called my brother-in-law, a man named Hugh, who'd been a contractor for 40 years and had no patience for nonsense. I told him the whole story. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Hugh. When I finished, he said, "You paid for a party you weren't allowed into." I said yes. He said, "What are you going to do about it?" I told him I wasn't sure yet. He said, "Well, whatever you do, be sure you can live with it." I've thought about that a lot. That framing. Not whether it was fair, whether I could live with it. A month after the wedding, I wrote Garrett a letter, a real letter, on paper. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him I'd missed his wedding, and I didn't fully understand why, but that I hoped he was happy, and that whatever I'd done to make him ashamed of me, I wished he'd told me directly. I told him about the loans and said I thought it was time to formalize them if he intended to repay them. I told him I loved him and I always would, but that love didn't require me to pretend nothing had happened. I mailed it certified. I have the delivery confirmation. He didn't call. He texted 3 weeks later. He said I was making things about money when they weren't about money. He said Simone felt uncomfortable with how I talked to her sometimes. He said the wedding seating had been complicated. I read that text several times, the way I'd read that email about the gardenias. Then I set my phone down and went out to my garage and spent 3 hours building a set of shelves I'd been putting off. I needed to do something with my hands. The following January, Garrett called asking if I'd consider co-signing a refinance on the condo. Interest rates had shifted, and they wanted to pull some equity out. He was friendly on the phone. Easy almost. Like the letter hadn't happened. Like the wedding hadn't happened. Like $42,000 and an empty seat at his reception were just water under the bridge. I told him I needed to think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. I thought about the money and the letter and the unanswered calls and the certified mail. I thought about Louise. I thought about that diner booth and the waitress who'd refilled my coffee without being asked. I thought about what it means to keep giving to someone who has made it clear your presence doesn't matter. I called him back and told him no. He said he was surprised. I said I understood. He asked why. I told him the truth. I said that I had spent my adult life building things, houses, circuits, a family, and that every structure has to rest on something solid. I told him that I'd tried to be solid for him, his whole life, and that I wasn't asking him to be grateful, but I was asking him to be honest. And until he could do that, I didn't think it was wise for either of us to be financially tied together. He hung up. For 2 months, nothing. Then his daughter was born. I found out through his Aunt Beverly, who found out from a cousin in Atlanta. Garrett had a daughter, my granddaughter. I sat with that news for a long time, but didn't cry exactly. Something more complicated than crying. I sent a card. A simple one. "Congratulations. I'm thinking of you. I'm here if you want me." I included a check for $500 for the baby, not because I felt I owed it, because I wanted her to know, whenever she was old enough to know anything, that someone thought she mattered from the very beginning. Garrett texted a thank you. That was the first direct communication in 2 months. 4 months later, he called. It was a Sunday morning in September. I was reading the paper on my back porch with a cup of coffee. He called and I let it ring once before I answered. We talked for a long time. He started by asking how I was doing, the way you do when you're working up to something. I let him take his time. Eventually he got quiet and then he said, "Dad, I should have made sure you were at the wedding. I don't have a good excuse for it." That was it. Not a long speech, not a detailed accounting, just that. I told him I appreciated it. We talked about the baby. Her name is Iris. He sent me a photo that evening, Simone holding her, tired and smiling, and Garrett beside them looking like a man who's just understood something new about what matters. Iris has Louise's ears. I know that sounds like something people say, but I looked at that photo for a long time, and I know what I saw. Things are not fully repaired. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. Simone and I are polite and careful with each other, and I suspect that will take time. The loans are being repaid. Garrett set up a monthly transfer, his idea, which I respected. I went to Atlanta in December to meet Iris for the first time. Garrett met me at the door of the condo and took my coat, and we didn't say much, but we didn't need to. I held my granddaughter for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my son's living room, in the same navy blazer I'd pressed for a wedding I never attended. I thought about Louise the whole time. I thought about how she would have sung to that baby. I thought about gardenias and tomatoes and a kitchen table in Columbus where we'd done our best work as a family, the ordinary kind of work that doesn't look like much until you're standing somewhere without it. Iris looked up at me with the unfocused gaze that newborns have, that sense that they're taking in something they can't yet name. I told her my name was Bernard. I told her I was her grandfather. I told her I was her grandfather. I told her I'd been waiting a long time to meet her. That was enough. For now, that was enough. I'd spent a lot of time sitting with what happened, not replaying it to feel the wound again, but trying to understand what it was really about. Because it was never just about a wedding list. When I stood in that lobby for 11 minutes watching a clock above a front desk in a hotel I had paid for, something clarified in me. Not bitterness. Clarity. There's a difference. Bitterness wants to burn things down. Clarity just lets you see what's actually there. I think about the choices I made along the way, the money I gave without conditions, the loans I kept informal because I didn't want paperwork between a father and his son. Those were my choices. I made them freely. But I also think about what I was teaching Garrett each time I absorbed a cost without naming it. I was teaching him that what I gave had no weight, that I would keep giving regardless of how I was treated, that my presence at his life was optional, but my checkbook was essential. I didn't intend to teach him that. But intentions don't override what we actually do. There's a particular kind of wisdom that takes time to develop, not book learning. I didn't go to college. I mean the kind that comes from paying attention to the consequences of your own decisions over decades. When I finally said no to co-signing that refinance, I wasn't punishing Garrett. I was being honest for the first time in a long time. Honest about what I could sustain. Honest about what I actually needed from him. That honesty cost me 2 months of silence, but it was the thing that eventually opened the door to a real conversation. What I've come to believe is that doing right by the people you love sometimes means not giving them what they ask for. Garrett needed to hear no. He needed to understand that my love was not a line of credit with no expiration date. Real love has to be mutual to survive. That's not a harsh truth, it's just true. And I needed to hold my ground without becoming someone I didn't recognize. That was the harder part. There were nights in Columbus when I could have picked up the phone and said whatever was easiest, just to end the silence. I didn't. Not because I was being stubborn, but because I knew that caving would just reset the clock. Whatever we were going to build from here had to rest on something real. I held Iris for the first time, and she looked up at me the way newborns do. What the world is still a question they haven't formed language for yet. And I thought, this is what it's all for. Not the money, not being right. This small person who had nothing to do with any of it, who deserved to know her grandfather without having to understand the complicated history first. I can't give her back the wedding I wasn't at. I can't undo the years that went sideways. But I can show up now as someone she can count on, someone who taught her father that accountability matters, that dignity is not the same as pride, and that the people who build things quietly are worth paying attention to. Louise would have understood all of it without me having to explain a single word. That's the thing about losing someone you built a life with. You carry their judgment with you like a compass. I asked myself more than once what she would have done in my position. She would have been steady. She would have waited. She would have kept the door open without propping it. That's what I tried to do.